So officially welcome everyone. Welcome to Coaching and Conflict, subtitled How Coaches Serve the World in Conflict. Briefly, when we were thinking about this webinar as part of International Coaching Week 2022, we were thinking of a theme. And at the time when we were thinking about it, so we're looking at March time. This was a time when, as you can probably remember, Ukraine and what's taking place still in Ukraine was fresh news, and it hit us all pretty hard. And I know I was, the North Point team was, I'm sure many of you who are in the coaching field were asking, what is it that we can do? Maybe not what is it that we can do specifically into this situation, but in a world that we see where conflict seems to be increasing, or not increasing, not getting any less. How can we who seek to serve others, to see other people grow, to see other people transform, how can we serve into that space? How can we serve a world that's in conflict? And that was the birth of this. After we had the idea, and now here we are today with two incredible speakers, joined by two extra panelists, making a panel of 4. And I'm very much looking forward to some both interesting, inspiring, and hopefully thought and emotional provoking conversations that we're going to have. We've got 2 speakers. First of all, I'm going to introduce you shortly, but we have Luisa Boaretto and Gerard van der Ven. Later, we'll be introducing you to Dr. Beatrix, Henkel, and Nick Labuschagne. Our first speaker is Luisa, and I'll introduce her to you just now. Just to let you know, we're going to have approximately, and some of these timings are a bit adjustable, but approximately somewhere around 30 minutes from Luisa, perhaps with some space for Q&A, we never know. Similarly for Gerard, after that, if there's time, we'll have a short break to allow us to stretch our legs, and then moving swiftly into having a panel discussion between myself as the moderator and our 4 panelists. If you have questions as we go along, please type them into the chat. My colleagues, Sarah and Christiane, will be keeping their eyes on the chat, looking for those questions, curating the questions, and when it comes to the Q&A section towards the end, we'll be reaching out to you, asking you to speak and ask your questions directly to the panel. So let's begin. And let's begin with Luisa. So we can go to the next slide, Trixie. So Luisa is the Regional Inclusion and Diversity and Employee Experience Manager of EMEAI. Do you call it EMEA, Luisa? Maybe you can tell us. I know that it's Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India, I think, for Dow Chemicals. Now, Luisa is part of the Dow Office of Inclusion and is responsible for designing, driving, and implementing the inclusion, diversity, and equity and employee experience strategy for the region in Dow, and providing expertise, consultation, and support to the businesses, functions, employee resource group leaders, and employee experience champions in the region. She shapes interventions that lead to measurable results and long-term behavioral change. In 2020, under Luisa's leadership, Dow was appointed among the top 10 companies in the Financial Times ranking for diversity leaders. Luisa holds a master's degree in economics from Boaretto University in Milan, that's Italy, and she attended executive education at the London Business School in the UK, INSEAD in France. She's also a certified internal auditor, and she obtained her professional coach certification, ACC, in 2014. So, ladies and gents, I give you Luisa.
Thank you, Matt, for the nice introduction and for the opportunity of being here celebrating the International Coach Federation Week together with North Point Academy. And it's a pleasure, and Trixie, you can go to the next slide, to be here with you all and giving you a little bit of flavor on what conflict means in an inclusion and diversity kind of environment. I brought some visual. You will hear me asking to move slide to slide because I'm a visual learner. So I hope also you will help you to follow a little bit my train of thoughts. if you want to go to the next slide, Trixie, I wanted just to give you a little bit of myself. Matt introduces me with my professional background, but I think it's important also that you know a little bit about myself and my relationship with conflict. You can tell from the accent, I was born and raised in Italy. I also now hold a Swiss nationality because I have a dual citizenship, and I've been living abroad for 16 years now. So I don't call myself a cultural, native in other countries, but definitely I do have exposure to international environments. And I work for a multinational company, and you heard from my background, I graduated, my master is in economics. So how did I end up in inclusion, diversity, and employee experience role, which I'm very passionate about? It's all about thanks to coaching. After 10 years of my career in finance, quite good career in finance in the company, I did realize my passion were people. My passion was, enabling people to find their inner strengths. And thanks to a coach, a professional certified coach, I was able to have the courage and the clarity of following something which I was more passionate about. And that's how eventually, after different roles, finding my way, but I did land in the current role, which is very aligned to my passion and to my values. I want also to share with you what is my personal relationship with conflict. The rest of the intervention will be about my role, inclusion, diversity, and equity. But we always have to remember as coaches that we work with individuals. And you cannot really distinguish, the person from the fact. There is a sort of an interrelation. As I said, I was born and raised in a culture that, for the one of you who are familiar with the cultural lenses, is considered an innocence guilt kind of culture. So there have always been a right and there always been a wrong. And so when you try to defend one of the other, you enter into a conflict, and the conflict is seen as a negative. And then, of course, it's thanks to coaching as well that I've started to learn that, well, maybe that's a possibility of looking at it, but it's not only that. And also the role of emotions that for me are weaknesses. In reality, I start to realize that they are a lot of energy, they bring a lot of energy, and you can redirect that energy that comes from a conflict into something more positive. I'm not there on the other side yet. I keep working with a coach myself to go through certain topics. But again, I wanted to give you this background because of the reason we are here today. And by the way, feel free to put question or comment in chat. I'll try to do my best to monitor. I know otherwise I can count on the North Pole team to help me. And for sure, I will try to keep some time at the end here or at the end of the event to answer your other question or comments. If you want to go to the next slide, Trixie, very briefly about inclusion, diversity, and equity. And maybe many of you are familiar, but I don't want to assume that. So the role I have is really to be making sure that everybody can thrive for their uniqueness. I don't like the word diversity so much, because for me, diversity means there is something which is a standard, but that's usually utilized as a word. I prefer uniqueness. But again, not only you need to have an environment, working environment in my case, where you have different perspective, but you need to make sure that those different perspectives can thrive in the working environment. And if you want to move to the next slide, I want also to add, and I know it sounds like a lot of education, but you will see how it matters for conflict. It's not only about inclusion and diversity, but it's also about treating everybody with equity. And I need to make a clear distinction between equity and equality. You see above what equality means, and equality means giving everybody the same thing, access to the same bicycle to bike somewhere. Well, if you're a child, or if you're a person with disability, or maybe you're a little bit short or taller, you may have difficulties riding that bike. And maybe only the one who really fits the bike will be able to go faster and reach destination. What equity is, and is immediately self-explanatory, is about giving everybody the bikes they need to ride. And it may seem, I would say, pretty intuitive, pretty clear, but I want you to hold to this picture when we will talk about conflict in inclusion diversity, because you will see what it means to give everybody a bike depending on the needs they have. So let's get into the topic. And if you can move to the next slide, let's talk about, okay, why inclusion diversity brings a conflict. Well, first of all, I need to tell you a secret. And the secret is that in the inclusion journey, I call it, is a cultural journey. So it's a cultural change. And if you want to move to the next slide, when we talk about change, sometimes it's positively perceived. I'm old enough to remember, or senior enough, I should say, old is probably not the right term, but senior enough to remember, when to make a phone call and talk to family, which was living somewhere else. You need to do and plan for it, go somewhere. Maybe you have a phone inside, but maybe for some international call was still good to go to a public phone. Now we don't even have to think about it. With the power of a Wi-Fi and a mobile phone, we can really, like tonight, I can be with you in Dubai, and I'm thrilled about it. I mean, wish I was there physically, but still, I'm really enjoying the experience. In some cases, and again, if you go to the next slide, changes may be positive. I can do things myself. I have the independence and the flexibility of checking in, for example, at my convenience. But if something goes wrong, or if I am in a country where I don't speak the language and that terminal, for whatever reason, is in local language, I may still need the human interaction to help me. And by the way, look at the people in the picture. In this case, again, it was a general picture taken, but everybody is at the counter where probably a human being is helping them, and those machines don't seem to be so much populated. Well, and so keep in mind that change, change can be positive, but it can also be a little bit destabilizing. But we said about IND as a cultural change. And if I give you the other element of culture, and you go to the next slide, Trixie, I love it, because every time I'm trying to enter into the cultural discussion, I need to remember myself that culture is something that we put unconsciously, as I said it, on top, and we define as normal. But culture is what you see in the picture, is a mix of different elements, which, I'm not here one to describe. I'm here to describe maybe with visual. And again, if you go to the next one, I like the image of the iceberg, and you can tell me I'm a visual person. I'm bringing you a lot of images, but you can see how, culture, what we see or what we believe defines a culture are usually only the emerged part of the iceberg. And I'm not going to tell you any news. Between news, there are coaches, professional coaches, people who want to become coaches. So you have a natural attitude to understand that what you see is not all there is. And organizations are very similar. I mean, if I look my role as IND leader for, indeed, EMEI is Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India, so a huge region, that's what I see. And if you move to the next slide, what I do see is not one iceberg, but I see many icebergs. And I like to work with individuals, so I'm focusing on the individual part, but you can take the iceberg analogy for function, for business, for country, for whatever dimension you like people to look at. So, and again, if you have questions, I know I have pretty passionate style, so I'm gonna pause here. I'm gonna enter in the next phase, what will you do? And you'll see how conflict. But if you have questions, please put in chat. I will be happy to answer and take a moment. While you type your question, if you have, feel free, Trixie, to go to the next slide. Or we can wait a second if there are questions, that's fine as well. I'm just checking chat, hot scene on. So I hope I still get everybody with me. So what happened next? No panic. That's the first things to do in IND. No panic, because again, there may be not only one solution, but it's a matter of understanding which can be the better solution. Going to the next slide, again, and a little bit of change management theory. When we change, as you saw before from the images I brought, you may have different reaction. I mean, for you, maybe the switch from a telephone, fixed telephone to the web was a positive. For some of you may have been less positive. Some of you even didn't notice. Some of you were born digital, so you don't even know what was before. But the natural reaction, you know, how our brain works, is that the first reaction to change is destabilization. Human beings don't like change because change means threat, and we don't know if we can survive. So it's perfectly normal in whatever type of change, external or internal, to be destabilized and go through the emotion you see here. Now, of course, I can go on the work of coaches to try to help people to go through the curve change. And my work as an IND leader is exactly the same. I need to bring people along the IND journey and make sure that the change doesn't destabilize that. And what happened is the IND journey touches, and if you go to the next slide, as I said, it's personal. The previous one, if you don't, perfect. It's personal. And when we talk personal, I like to define it as the crystal balls. I'm asking to change something about you, which is related, and we'll see in a second, to something which for you is private. Something that for you, it's what I call the crystal ball. And I'm sure you don't want to break a crystal ball, and you will do whatever in your hands to protect it if it touches that crystal ball. I invite you for a second to think, what is personal to you? And again, you can go as deep as values, as belief, as things that are untouchable in the deeper sphere of yourself. Or you can also think a little bit, something a little bit lighter, like for me, lunchtime, when I was before COVID pandemic, working in the office, lunchtime for me meant sport. I'm a mother of 2 kids. That was the only time during my day I could squeeze in some half an hour of fresh air running. And, you know, we had facility where I could do it. But if people were inviting me for lunch, I was feeling you're touching my well-being, because that's the only moment in my day I can recharge batteries. Lunch, I mean, I'm not talking about anything strange, but something that for me was very, very personal, similar to weekends or evening for other people that are moments they want to protect. So when you touch a crystal ball, and yes, you can go to the next slide, the natural reaction is most likely one of those reactions. And I'm taking that from, you know, if you're familiar with the work of Brené Brown, she just released her latest book on Atlas of Emotions. And that one, just a sample. But all those feelings and emotions are quite, you know, could be reaction. So, and I'm reading the question, how do we present change to be accepted? We'll get to there, Jacob. Thanks for the question. So, and if you go to the next slide, how does it relate to IND? Well, all those reactions is because you're touching a private things. But you can tell me, well, changing a Wi-Fi or a phone methodology is not really personal. Now, I put here some of the causes of what is touched that some people consider crystal ball, all because of those things they consider what is touched in IND is a crystal ball. And I want to spell it out very, very clearly. So privilege, and we'll get to that in a second. When people are touched on their privileges, unconsciously, they react and defend because we are touching a crystal ball, and then the reaction is one of those strong emotions. Sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes it's cultural norms. Again, things that are unconscious, but are so embedded in ourselves that will build the wall. Education, fixed mindset, etc. So all these things can provoke, when they are touched, the same reaction similar to when you touch a personal value. And there where my job starts, and there where I need really to intervene. So how to do that? Let's come to Jacob's question. If you go to the next slide, I mean, I want to present you your friend, I hope. I call it the elephant. And I'm pleased to introduce you to your irrational or emotional part. We all have an elephant in ourselves. And if you want to the next slide, that elephant is the biggest part of our reaction to anything that touches our inner sphere. And the elephant is an elephant. So I love elephants, but if they are wide, they are pretty strong, pretty big, pretty powerful, and honestly, they want immediate reward. You can ride an elephant, you can have that small man or woman on the top of the elephant, which is helping and guiding the elephant, teaching the elephant where to do, helping to see the path. But the rider, compared to the elephant, if the elephant gets really wild, probably the rider has not too many opportunity to help. Now you have a third element again, Jacob, that's probably for you. You do have the path. So if you're familiar with the nudge theory, economical behavioral theories, you can build environments that kind of not only encourage, but let's say nudge or force in a positive way people to do things in a certain way. And again, the path can be positive, as I said, nudge in a positive way, or the path can confuse it. So you can have the opposite reaction. Now, I hope I probably give you an image, which is one of the elephant. And again, it's not my inventions. There are psychological theories about that. But I think it makes sense, right? And you can think about IND, you can think about personal life, you can think about professional life. But if you have that clear in mind, you can understand if people are reacting with the elephant or with the rider, and if the path is correct. Now, if I go back for a second to the IND journey, and you move to the next slide, Trixie. In IND, it's mostly about the elephant. So when people talk about IND, they think they talk about the path, fundamental, intervention, processes, procedure, way of doing, quotas, whatever you can think about. You can build the business case and tell people that's the right things to do. A more equal and equitable society is what creates more innovation, more sustainable change, more, peace, if I can go back to the geopolitical situation. But in reality, if I want to be honest with you all, it's an emotional decision. People, when dealing with IND and all those topics in IND, are emotionally touched. And that's why you understand why conflict is natural, because it touches such an important piece of, the people crystal ball. And again, it can be due to ignorance, due to cultural belief, to whatever, but you touch is something that for them is untouchable. And then naturally conflict exists. Now, you can probably skip the next slide. It was just an example for the past, but you can go, that's, why in a surgery room we do have green colors, is because that give peace both to the surgeon and to the patient. But then if we move then on coaching and conflict and IND, I took one of the many, elements of effective coaching. Each of us as whoever goes to a coaching process kind of highlight elements. And again, those are just a proposal in this case, but they are not the only one. But you see, and again, I'm expecting you to be somehow familiar. I'm not here to spend too much time to discuss them. But if you go to the next slide and I try to make the comparison on the 8 elements of IND, I can tell you previous slide, thank you, Trixie, this one. You don't see a big difference. The only big difference, I change model strategy to role modeling, but all the other elements stays. So if you understand that the IND journey, which provoke conflict, is so personal, you immediately understand why having a coaching approach does help. And for me, if I can just highlight some, listening is fundamental. There is no IND manager who has the answer. And I'll get to example in a second when sometimes it goes wrong because you believe you have the right answer and there is the right or wrong. Curiosity, I mean, the be not judgmental, so important in coaching when you enter in the curiosity space with a client, so important in IND, when again, you have to hold judgment and suspend judgment, even if you know probably that's the wrong things that is happening, but you need to understand why it's happening, what's driving the people, what caused the situation, and helping people to see the difference. And then another element that for me, it's key, both in coaching and in IND, and yes, you can go to the next slide. It's what's called psychological safety. So bringing, you can call it trust, but being able to create that relationship, and it could be with a single individual, could be with an organization, with a business department, but you need to create that holy space where psychological safety is there and people can do wrong, can ask that question where they say, why? But why should I have more women on top? I mean, aren't we forcing it? And, you know, the best is a man in this case as a candidate. If they feel safe to ask that question, it means it's a space is safe enough to have that conversation, courageous conversation, and move ahead. Now, you can skip the next slide. You can go ahead and I want just here for a second also to, you know, we talk a lot about conflict as a negative connotation. I want you also to consider conflict as a very positive, because when conflict is perceived an exchange, and I'm talking about a respectful conflict, I'm not talking about, for example, what's happening now in the eastern part of Europe. But when it's positive, it's an opportunity to innovate and grow. So again, cultural lenses, my cultural lenses tell me conflict is bad, but I'm learning to see, especially in IND conflict, as an opportunity for growth for both parties. And now let's go, maybe I think I have a few minutes more. Bear with me another few minutes. I want also to bring some real example, because a lot of theory, a lot of IND and change management, and I hope you see the analogy also with coaching, but let's get into a little bit, okay, what's happening in reality. And again, if you go to the next slide, I brought a visual about, you know, how, you know, maybe in chat, you know, we have 20 plus participants. So can you just put in chat what you see here very briefly? Tell me what you see, what you think you see, whatever your interpretation. Or what stands out for you in this image? Any brave people? Okay, wow, now I see a lot of messages coming. So 2 people coming together to close a gap, build a bridge, an opportunity to build a bridge, towards rider architects making friends. Awesome. Similarity versus differences. Are just about to finish the bridge, or have they just started to break it down? Coming together for a purpose, and thank you for now your wild on chat, which is great. I love how you're positive eyes. When I look at it, I was bringing it as an example of a certain behavior, and then exactly I realized that was my cultural lenses. What I saw here was 2 people, I think someone mentioned in the chat, either breaking a bridge or not willing to put the stone. I mean, whatever stone will fit, but they're like, no, I'm holding my stone and you are holding yours. And that to me, it's what I define. And again, any vision of the image, all your interpretation are perfectly fine. Again, it's how we see, the eyes we put on. But why I wanted to bring it, and you can go to the next slide, Trixie, is for what's called the passive aggressive behavior. So, you know, if you look through my eyes where I saw the people didn't want to put the stone, but they were there with the stone and could be read, that's a behavior where people would say, oh yeah, let's build a bridge, but in reality will not put that stone down. And why I bring it, because when we talk about IND, we often think that conflict in IND are loud and visible, but in reality, because it touches such a personal sphere, and it's also sometimes political, they become what I have to deal on a daily basis is passive-aggressive behavior. People telling me it's clear, it's nice, we love it, but in reality, not taking an action in that direction. And another example of conflict in IND, if you go to this next slide, it's what's called microaggressions. Maybe many of you are familiar with the microaggressions, and those are subtle acts of exclusion, often unintentional, but especially in an international environment. And I definitely heard that sentence. And again, depends on the intention with which it's made. But someone surprises you like, oh, I didn't expect you to be so young, so old, so good at English, not. And you're like, what was your expectation? And then, your self-confidence may go a little bit back. Or, oh, my best friend is black or yellow, whatever. And like, so, what are you telling me is that you're open and liberal? And that when, conflict starts, because if you add microaggression or microaggression, people will suffer out of it. So moving to the next couple of slides, I think I have a couple of minutes more. So, my message is be an ally. So if you see a witness microaggression, please stand up. But moving into something a little bit more funnier about when did it go well and when did it go wrong. So if you move to the next slide, Trixie, and also the next one, personal example on when I did it completely wrong. And it's again related to culture. I was in a team of people with different culture from mine, but same culture between them. And while my culture, as I said, was innocence, guilt, so right or wrong, their culture was power and shame. So power and showing power was a key value for them. And as a coach, we had conflict on work-related relationship. And as a coach, I tried all my toolbox to, try, question, personal, what's in for you, what's in for me, let's, whatever you can think about. I was trying on a daily basis to get a communication and collaboration with that team. Didn't happen. I remained frustrated and guilt, and they remained power and strong. And reflecting back, and I never managed to get that situation fixed. We even got to my elephant. I really got emotional about it. I think my biggest error was I thought I was right, and that my worldview was the best worldview ever, and they were wrong, and I needed to bring them on my side. And that for me was the biggest error ever. So that's an example. Other example, if you just move to the next slide, sometimes it goes very well. And again, about culture, we did have a conflict internal to the team, interculturally, related even to something related to UAE and Israel, when last year they started the agreement for free negotiation. Now I think they just concluded. But people didn't see the business advantage. People still saw the different cultures. But in that case, we had to call someone external to help us to educate, increase awareness. So a traditional workshop about cultural differences. But the key element for me for success, I was a team of 15 people. We brought in coaches who could help every single participant to eventually understand that people have much more in common than their own culture and their own story. So they were able to distinguish who I am and whose my culture is from what's happening on a business level and how I can deal with that and just focus on the commonalities versus the differences. But until they were focusing on the difference, there was clear, evident conflict that was even escalating up. So with that, my last slide, if you want to go to it, Trixie, my key message to you is, sometimes conflict happens, but there should be a part that if you want to solve the conflict, and especially in IND, also predisposition, like in coaching, in willing, not so much maybe to change from the very beginning, but at least a curiosity to see or to understand what you don't know, and starting from that curiosity place. And starting from the curiosity place, it always means a change, and the change may bring to someone else. So thank you everyone for listening. I hope I didn't annoy you too much. I probably don't have time for questions now, but I will monitor chat, and definitely after in the panel discussion, I'm happy to answer a question or at the end of the session. Thank you.
I'm on mute apparently. So hello. So thank you, Luisa. Thank you from all of us. And for all of us, let me invite you just to take a moment before we get onto Gerard, and take a moment just to pause and find somewhere to notes you brought that impacted you the most.
Yes.
I'm
not. I lost the audio, Matt. I don't know if you were talking to me.
I'm talking to everyone. I'm asking everyone just to reflect on what you were saying, Luisa. Just take a moment and to reflect. Was it about the crystal ball? Was it about the elephant? Was it about psychological safety? Or was it about something else? Take a moment and write or note down for yourself what it was. Maybe also think to yourself, what's a question that I'd love to ask either of Luisa or about what Luisa spoke about? That said, let me introduce Gerard. Let me bring up my notes. So, Gerard Fen, I'm hoping I pronounce your surname correctly, Gerard. He is the principal owner of Fen Consult. Gerard has spent a diverse career in the chemicals, plastics, and automotive industries. In different technical and leadership roles across multiple geographies, leading with a combination of functional expertise and change management affinity. Originally trained as a chemical engineer, but fascinated by people, culture, and what makes people tick, he's always been training, coaching, and mentoring people, apparently including himself, through challenging situations, not as a profession, but as an integral part of his role. Today, Gerard works as an independent consultant, helping companies and individuals make transitions in situations of significant change. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Gerard Fen. Welcome back, Gerard.
Yeah.
Good to have you with
Thanks,
us.
Matt. Trixie, I won't be showing any slides. What I'll be doing is I'll be telling you 3 different stories. And these are practical stories of where I met and dealt with conflict. I'd like to start with a conflict situation that I found myself in, and where I was not coached, not by myself or by anybody else. And now I'll tell you a little bit about what happened. And I think some of the things that Luisa talked about went live there and very visible. Talk about how that happened. And then I'll have 2 scenarios for you coming from the space of organizational change, merger and acquisitions. Business scenarios where there is a conflict, but there are multiple people, groups of people involved, and how we used techniques as part of helping people either resolve the negative sides of the conflict or feeding off the positive possibilities of the conflict. All right. So I have 3 stories. What I'd like to do is, after every little story, I want to give you the opportunity to comment or question through the chat. So let's begin with the beginning. Chemical engineer. I was a young chemical engineer, and let me tell you a conflict story. I was working in a big manufacturing facility, part of a global network. There was other facilities in other places in the world. And when I got there, young engineer, there was a current thinking about how you should run these facilities and what would be the performance indicators for people on the shifts, and what was a good operation and what wasn't. And obviously, being a young engineer, having been told you needed to think out of the box, I decided there was a much better way than, and that started a conflict. Very, very simple. I started to have discussions with the plant manager. We should do this and we should try that. And what I got back was, well, that's not the way we do things. I mean, here's how we do things. And my elephant, right? I don't respond very well to that sort of thinking. It's like, no, explain to me why. A lot of the why. So what I did, right? Because I wanted to, of course, I thought I was right. Huh? Luisa, you talked about that as well. Of course, I had a different idea than everybody else, but that didn't mean to me that it was less valuable. It was correct. So I started to look for people that I could convince that the idea was correct. And what happened was gradually I found a lot of connection with the people on the shifts. So the shift operator knew the facility very well. And I had continuing disagreement with other engineers and with my boss. Right? And what happened in my case, I was so convinced I was right and everybody else was wrong. And I did find some allies. So I started to, in my mind, and this is on hindsight, I didn't realize, I started to depersonalize my manager. This was no longer a person to me. This was an attribute, somebody with a wrong idea. And I was beginning to focus on the negativity or the disconnect. And I more of a fight mode. Right? I wanted to argue. I became argumentative. I tried to do things without asking or without. So I was getting into an unpleasant cycle, right? And there was no coaching, obviously, no self-coaching. And part of what sustained the cycle is I was looking for people, and there were people who said, yeah, you're right, we have to do this. There was a group of people, which was me plus the shift personnel, who were on one side, and then there was my plant manager and some other engineers who were on the other side. And it just went on for about a year. So we had many unpleasant conversations, not real arguments, no real fights, but it's just everybody was just unhappy, right? And I was just thinking, we're all unhappy, but that's because you're wrong and I'm right. So you change your mind and everybody's going to be happy. So I could have done with some coaching at that point in time, very much so. Now, to my luck, to everybody's luck, a new plant manager came in. And that person, very good coaching behavior, had heard about me, the one that was making trouble, but still had a good connection to the operational shifts. So there must have been some street credibility. And he just came and talked to me and started about, what was behind. And within 2 conversations, he helped me start to think about, well, what I was trying to achieve, call it my higher level objective, was exactly the same as everybody else's. Right? This was a manufacturing operation, and I wanted it to run safe, to run fast, to be, to be the best that it could be. And just by simply asking questions and guiding, well, if that's what you want, and that's what other people want, what would work in terms of getting to where you want to go, rather than just push? Are there alternative ways, because the way you're trying is not working, to get there? And effectively, by pushing me a little bit to think about, well, everybody else's position, what was motivating them, what was driving them, I sort of lost my fight modus and I went into negotiation and convincing mode. Right? By triggering the curiosity about, why is it that people think that this way is better than what I think, we actually got into decent conversations, all right? And in no time, we were getting into a situation where after a year of painful interactions, we started to do little things. I was given the opportunity to demonstrate what I thought was the right way. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. And the conflict was resolved. Right? So this was as a young engineer before I learned about things. So maybe you can show my first slide, Trixie, sort of about this little story of how I got into a conflict and what I did. And as Trixie brings up the slide, I would welcome comments or questions. This is how my story begins. Have we lost Trixie or?
One moment, Gerard. I think that yeah, we lost Trixie. So we were saying at the beginning, what can go wrong? And
yeah, that's what I asked. Okay.
But I think that yeah, Matt
okay.
or Sarah.
Excellent. So this story is about, you know, a conflict that I had, right? And I think what I did without coaching was I started with a judgment, right? There was a right and there was a wrong, and I was looking at what were the differences, and right, and I created through step by step, because I was looking for confirmation. I was right, but I want other people, and I found people who thought I was right. So I created an us versus them environment, and effectively, nothing moved forward. Everybody was right. So when a new manager came in and he started coaching me a little bit, he showed me, well, you know, rather than starting with right or wrong, think about what you like to achieve and what way can help you get there. What works, right? And start from what you have in common with other people rather than where you have your differences. And he also taught me to postpone judgment, right? To not be judgmental and to try and understand what's driving the other individual. Because if you start doing that, in many situations, you can negotiate a path forward. All right. So that was a big learning for me. Is part of that put me on the path of what Matt said. In my career, I've been in many difficult, conflict-filled situations in businesses with big transitions. Where things were not, let's call it, optimal, right? And I'd like to share you with stories about, let's call it suboptimal situations where there was conflict, there were larger groups of people involved, and I'd like to describe to you what happened and how and why certain coaching techniques helped to create a path forward. All right. So you can kill the slides, and I'll talk about my second story, which is a big merger and acquisition. Situation was the following: one big company buys another big but slightly smaller company, and I was working for the biggest of the two. And this was called a merger. The other company was being bought because of its portfolio, its business culture, its capabilities, and you know, the executive blurb was, we're going to be together. We're going to be, you know, two equal partners moving together as one. Now, any of you that have worked in mergers and acquisitions, is this hardly ever happens. There's a bigger party, there's a big dog, there's a top dog, there's an underdog, and there is, let's put it at a very high executive level, there's also expectations about this coming together. So this particular case, same thing, big expectations. I was invited to, you know, the global executive meeting, and they started to talk about the synergies and the rationale, bringing things together, and objectives and why. And then we were told, you know, now we're a team, so go out there and work together. That's very nice, huh? So you get chartered to now you're a team, right? We put you in one room, we're giving you the T-shirt, you're a team, this is going to work. What happened is people coming in from the organizations that were being bought at the executive level, and I spent some time with them, it felt a bit like, to them, a little bit of a hostile takeover. And they'd all been offered retention bonuses, but most of them had decided, well, we'll sit out the retention period and then we're off. People were being moved around. The original CEO of the incoming company was immediately replaced by a new And so that sent the signal to the incoming organization. Well, things may not be as good as they seem. So there was on the incoming organization lots of negative emotions, anxiety. People were a bit upset, and some of the key executives were on, although nobody said it explicitly, were on the path of moving out. They were going to leave this. And I was in charge of the service organization, and let's call it the middle level management, right? And those people coming in, they knew in some instances, they felt their trusted executives, the people they've been working with, their bosses, right, who they knew and who supported them, were on their way out. And they were going to be asked to realize the synergies. And many of you know that synergies is a euphemism usually for cost reduction and job cuts. Huh? We call it, that's, and to make matters worse, this was at the beginning of 2009 when the financial crisis, stock values plummeted. So I was tasked to take these middle managers who were in offices around Europe, Middle East, Africa, not India, in my case at that time, to bring them together and to work out these synergies, right? Because Paris had 2 offices, Germany, Frankfurt had 2 offices, Moscow, Istanbul had 2 offices. Bring them together, right, and realize the synergies. So I did 2 things, right? First of all, I told my executives, okay, I'm going to have a 3-day work meeting and we're going to talk synergies and we're going to build a plan, right? But I decided that's not what I'm going to do. I'm just going to say that, so I'm not going to be bothered by the senior executives. I'm going to bring people together and actually days of play. I had a counterpart in the incoming organization. We'd been working together. We clicked very well. So we actually brought about 25 to 30 of these middle managers together in a place, and we started off with what I call a metaphorical visualization. I actually used a movie, Disney's Fantasia, and movie clips from Disney Fantasia to little games and playful interaction. I did stand-up comedy, and we did not talk business for 2 days. Because what I wanted to do is I wanted the people in that room to start feeling comfortable interacting with each other. Not at a business level, but take the anxiety down and at least give them the feeling that the people I'm with in this room, they're good people. I can talk with them. I'll be able to work with them. So what we actually did was officially we initiated what I call the Mickey Mouse Academy of Magic. We had people do all sorts of magic game, play tricks, use the Fantasia movies. And in the course of 3 days, what happened was a lot of the anxiety was reduced. Right? People started to enjoy interacting with each other to build a bit of trust. Right? So all of the rational stuff we just postponed. At the end of the it's a bit like the Freemasons do with their handshake. We handed everybody a small pin, which was a little Mickey Mouse symbol, and everybody graduated the academy, right? And they went back out into the field, wearing the little pin, sometimes hidden, sometimes visible. But they felt like they belonged to a community, and there was a group of people that understood and supported them, right? And from there, we were able to do all the businesses, all the difficult decisions, etc., etc. So in a anxiety conflict situation where the business pressure is high, I think the most important part is to address the anxiety and help people to build relationships, right? So that later on, from a relative level of trust, they can work out the business issues and the rational issues, right? So Matt or Trixie, if you can show my second slide. And please, questions or comments, I'd welcome them. Yeah. So we focused on the emotionality, which is not exactly what the executives asked me to do, but what I found was most important to do. When we created a safe environment, right? We use what I call metaphorical visualizations, right? And if you're trying to get people to interact, to work together, to build trust, to convey messages, visualization helps, and particularly if you can use stories, and if you have then both, usually, right? That's a story with visualization, and you can use movie clips. That works very well. Teach people to interact with each other first in a playful manner before you get to the content. Relationships, create a community. All of those things will enable rational work collaboration in the next stages, right? This is an element of this emotional integration, building community, allowing people to build trust is something that in many mergers and acquisitions is underestimated or sometimes even completely ignored. And it's, in my experience, one of the underlying reasons why many mergers and acquisitions are either, at best troublesome, right? And in many instances, even failures. Because it's not about the rationale, it's not about the money, it's about the people in all these different places, fronted with new people that they have to start to learn to work with and trust, right?
I think it's very proper to read a question now.
Yeah. I was reading it from Jacob, so thanks. Changing our mindset does open the door to what you have reported to the management after the Mickey Mouse graduation. Well, first and foremost, I did not report anything about the graduation or the Mickey Mouse. I don't think I reported back a lot to the management at this stage, other than we had the team together and we discussed the targets and the synergy objectives, etc., etc. Part of the management, and this was a choice that I made, there was parts of the management, some that I trusted, some of my mentors and coaches. I talked to them about it because I knew they would understand. Right? Some of the others, I just didn't bother because I knew I'd be talking to people who would then start to criticize or question. And we just from into the actual work, which we did remotely. So we had people in online meetings, and because they knew each other, they were familiar with each other, and then that facilitated discussion. And I reported back on those plans, what we did with the offices and office integrations and process changes and also those sorts of things. Right? So in this particular case, it was my estimate and shared by my counterpart from the incoming company, also based on the interactions with all the senior executives, that if I'd start to talk about it, they would stop me. So I decided not to talk about it so they wouldn't stop me. And once it had happened, the effect of collaboration could no longer be reversed. So it worked. So, and that's a bit of it's part of my modus operandi. I think Christiana will know that I don't always do what I'm told. I try to look for whatever works best. And if my bosses don't like it, I don't talk about it too much. I just make it work with the people involved. Huh? Does that answer a bit the question, Jacob? I think it does. Huh? Shall we get to my third story? Because I talked about the beginning of an merger and acquisition where there was anxiety, right? And there was things happening, and there was a bit of turbulence. And how we gave people a safe environment, what Luisa talked about, huh? And then allowed them to interact and focus on the emotions. I also, at some point in time, was brought into a business which was acquired. I'll give you a short story about that. It was a business that was acquired to relatively small, for the big company I was working for, relatively small, which was a nice addition to the portfolio in the automotive industry. New products, and very wisely, the buying company decided to just let it run as a fully owned subsidiary, because it was doing well, and let it run, and we'll take the benefits from it. But after a while, at a corporate level, it was decided, well, we need to bring them into the family, right? And bringing them into the family meant putting them on the company-wide ERP, enterprise resource planning system. Big IT implementation based on the operating model of the parent company. But this particular acquisition had a different operating model that made them successful. So what happened was performance was going down, service levels, all sorts of trouble. And I was brought in as a new leader at the level of the customer service. And because there was loss of performance and there was things not working, everybody told me, you better fix your shitty department, because the way things work, wherever an issue manifests itself, people attribute the cause to whoever's had the issue last in their hands. Nobody looks up the chain and sees where the causes are. And everybody was upset with everybody. And some of the executive leaders, they came talk to me and says, well, you better fix this in the next couple of weeks or else, right? And there was lots of noise. So and everybody's going around in a circle. So I think luckily, or through the coaching that I received during my career, I can usually keep my cool. So I decided to just get in, again, under the radar, no official requests, and start to follow the process and the actual data. What was happening? Follow the process. What's happening? And started finding things. And what I then did is we had a small official group of functions tasked to, I brought them together saying, okay, we're going to solve this. But I worked with every individual. And I talked them through multiple times with the help of external experts to what was happening at their part of the process. So very rational, data-driven, just repeat. And what happened was, you cannot deny facts. At some point, people started to say, well, actually, yeah. Because the shit comes out at the back end, it doesn't mean it's cause there. There's causes everywhere. And the tension, which is based on fear, that people didn't really understand what was happening before, started to go down. And there was more understanding. And as soon as you start getting into understanding, it's hard to stay unreasonably angry. You can still be upset, but you start working towards a bit more of acknowledgement of what was going on. So we gradually, with all the functional leaders, and we did this bit by bit, that this was 1 year of step by step, started improving things. I mean, we found out that the real cause was, well, there was an operating model which was badly designed and people were badly trained. So nobody had a chance to do this successfully. The second part of this was, as a consequence, we had about 10 to 15 million, somewhere in the region of write-downs to be had, which the business leadership didn't want to take, because as long as it's in the books, right, it's on your asset side, and if you take it, it affects the P&L. And I did the same thing there. Worked with the business leaders, again, looking at all the data, and we finally agreed, well, we better bite the bullet. Right? And so through a very irrational, angry, aggressive situation with people at each other's throats, by focusing on the data, on the facts again and again and again, we were able to bring the situation back down to earth and get into the resolution mode. And as a consequence, I mean, it also initiated a number of other improvements on speaking terms again, finally. So if you can show my last slide, please. And in the meantime, I'll invite questions and comments. Yeah? Okay. So this was a close to death acquisition, because it was doing. The first thing for me, and I was combining coaching techniques, but I had the role of a leader, so I was the one showing composure. trying to set an example. I focused on process and some neutral experts, and I worked with every individual player and confronted them with the facts and gradually mitigated their fears and judgments. Very important in situations like that, there's got to be somebody who doesn't panic. Whatever happens, don't panic. No matter how bad it gets, people screaming at you, whatever, don't panic. And then you can de-escalate gradually. And once you've de-escalated through the facts part, then you can start to work on root causes and repairs. So depending on where you are, right, you might use, and where the people in the situation are, you might use different coaching techniques. And even in group settings or where multiple people are involved, working with individuals can actually help a group, a team, a business move forward or get out of a hole in this particular case, right? So those were the kind of stories I wanted to tell, some different approaches in what I found to be real life. I have never been in a merger or acquisition where everything was hunky-dory and everything worked and everybody loved everybody else and there was no conflict. There is always conflict, but conflict can be partially mitigated and utilized to move forward, and coaching techniques play a vital role in getting there. I'm out of time. Great.
Gerard. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Gerard. And so for everyone else, take a moment again, slow yourself down and think through what Gerard was saying. What is it that was most important to you? Was it about, like, as he said at the beginning, recognizing that he wanted to be right and someone else was saying, that's not how we do things? Was it about finding commonality and agreement? Was it around postponing judgment, understanding the person, negotiating a path forwards, creating a safe environment, or alternatively, helping someone focus on the facts to allow them to de-escalate, calm down, and then come to the person? And what question might you want to ask either of Gerard or of anyone in the panel very shortly? John, let me come to you. Do we have time for that 5-minute break to stretch our legs, or shall we keep moving forwards?
Considering that we started a little bit late to allow everybody to come in, I think that we can have just 5 minutes break, okay? But we need to start again at 8:17 is going to be okay. It's
Okay, so
17 minutes past the hour. Christiana, that sounds Swiss.
Exactly.
Yes.
So wherever you are in the world, 17 minutes past the hour of whatever it is, we'll be back here and we'll be bringing in 2 more people into the panel. See you then.
Gerard, just to let you know, you've got a couple of comments there in the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading through them. Thanks for the comments. And if they turn into questions, then I'd be happy to.
Matt, you're on mute.
I'm on mute again.
Yes.
So I was just saying we're on 17 minutes past. Let's keep the time. And so thank you, Luisa and Gerard. Joining Luisa and Gerard now on the panel, I have a panel of 4 plus myself as moderator. Firstly, we have Dr. Beatrix Henkel. Beatrix is the founder of RACE, R-A-C-E, Raising Awareness of Coaching for Education. Now, Beatrix says that she's been studying the language of educational institutions in a multitude of contexts since 2003. She believes in the power of human relationships and loves working with inspiring people who are passionate about co-creating existing realities. Her main areas of expertise are leadership coaching, team building, program design, group facilitation, academic research, public speaking, and career development. A very broad range of skills she's bringing to bear for us today on the panel. Welcome, Beatrix. Great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
And then secondly, also joining us on the panel is Nick Labuschagne. Nick is the Senior Director of Strategy for APCO Worldwide. Now, Nick is the regional lead of the Crisis and Issues Management Practice. He's a corporate and governmental strategist with over 25 years experience in emerging markets, so that's Middle East and Africa, helping organizations to successfully and sustainably manage reputational risk. He started his career as a chemical engineer in South Africa, and on completion of his postgrad studies, he entered the financial derivatives market in the City of London. He then returned to South Africa to work as a corporate strategic planner in the industrial and retail asset management sectors. After making a transition into strategic communications in 2003, he was appointed to the Government of Dubai's Strategic Affairs Committee to manage a number of crucial issues that were negatively impacting the growth of Dubai. And in 2012, he was appointed as a strategic communications advisor to the General Secretariat of the Executive Council of the Abu Dhabi government. Nick holds a BSc in Chemical Engineering, an MBA, an MA in East Asian Studies, an MLit in Terrorism Studies, an MSc in Sustainability Studies, and best of all, he's also a certified coach. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Matt.
Matt, maybe one of the first questions that we can ask in the panel is specifically for Nicholas and Beatrix. How do they relate to the stories that both Gerard and Luisa mentioned this evening?
I was in full flow. I got kicked off Zoom there, I think.
Oh, really? Okay. I took over.
You did. I saw that. I was speaking to Beatrix.
Okay, go ahead then.
So I was speaking to Beatrix and then also afterwards to Nick, and to say, first of all, introduce yourself a bit more personally other than your professional introduction. So say hello to us all. But then the question is, what are your insights from what Luisa and Gerard were talking to? And how does that impact your context? So Beatrix, if you go first.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you so much for both talks. It was very insightful and very personal. I truly appreciate that you brought in the personal stories together with the references and academia and something theoretical understanding. It was more relatable and very authentic. A few things that resonated with me was that I Googled conflict the word conflict and its origin. And it comes from con, Latin, together, and fligere, which is we are fighting together. And the image that came up for me is that, yes, we are fighting together, and our tools are listening, empathy, compassion, love. And we are doing this together. So that was something really nice that came up while I was listening to you both. Another point that really resonated with me is how often it's happening. How often it's happening in my life, how often it's happening in the lives of the people around me, and how important it is to remember that we are more similar than different. We are more connected in that iceberg model, that we don't see that invisible connection than the one that we want to see. And that's our choice. And from that choice comes the alignment between the heart and the mind, where I'm consciously loving you because you are like me. So that was really nicely illustrated in a couple of examples that you brought up, but it was also a very powerful reminder to look for the balance and the synchronicity, which is already in us. A final point I would like to bring up is related to us, because every single change and every step that we are taking forward is our choice, and it starts with us. And the importance for coaches and non-coaches together to realize that all the tools we are talking about tonight and what we are promoting here with the idea of coaching is already accessible to all of us. And it's a matter of choice if we are choosing to use it daily, starting with ourselves and leading ourselves and coaching ourselves in the first place, or no. It's absolutely a choice. So I think these were the highlights that I would like to share at this moment.
Thanks, Beatrix.
You're welcome.
And Nick, maybe say hello to us briefly, and then what are your reflections on what's happened so far, and how does it impact your context?
As you can imagine, being in charge of crisis and issue management in the region, a lot of my days are spent trying to unravel very, very complicated situations. Often the situations feel completely intractable, and I must admit the learning that I have gained from my career in coaching, albeit reasonably short, has really helped me to bring some entirely different perspectives to the way, let me put it this way, how our industry deals with these types of situations. Part of the challenge that I've had is trying to bring something from what is deemed in certain areas to be a soft science into the fairly hard-nosed corporate reputation space, where the stakes are incredibly high and mistakes can be incredibly painful for all concerned. But I'd just like to go back to the two presentations that we've just had. Both of them resonated very, very strongly with me. Our firm it's a woman-owned firm, and the majority of our staff are female. We're international. We have people from all over the world, and we have people of all different cultures and persuasions. So we have a very strong theme of inclusion that runs through our firm. And one of our primary offerings to our clients globally is DEI. But what we've been noticing recently is the subtle, the passive aggression kickback that we are starting to see, in particularly out in the United States, where most of our practice is taking place, where we go and work for companies, and everybody gets put through the course, they get put through the training, and it all seems fine at the conclusion of the training, but we start to hear undercurrents and rumblings of how people feel that they are having systems and belief systems imposed upon them, and their voices are not being heard. And unfortunately, this is starting to come out as passive aggression and obstruction. And I think it was pointed out earlier, the microaggressions are starting to manifest themselves in the workplace. So just something to put out there, but to understand that unless the trainings are delivered in an intelligible and sensible way, as Luisa has pointed out, clearly this is what has caused DAO to be recognized as a leader in the space, because you have somebody of your caliber with your background and your approach. I don't think many other organizations, I stand corrected, but I don't think many other organizations are handling it this sensitively. And it'll be interesting to see what the long-term impact of that is. And then Gerard, the Disney Fantasia is a fabulous idea. And I love the concept of ask forgiveness rather than permission. I think it's a great approach to getting things done. And entirely, when you think of it, when you reflect on it, entirely commonsensical, because how on earth are you going to expect two different tribes, in effect, to work together happily unless they have broken down those barriers, see each other as companions, as colleagues? And it's so surprising. I've worked on a number of major mergers and acquisitions. And just like Gerard said, I never view these as mergers or acquisitions. I see them as takeovers. Essentially, there's always one party that's stronger than others. And how on paper they look fabulous. The management consultants have run all the numbers. They've put all the processes in place to develop the synergies, and then nothing happens. Or in actual fact, they end up with a complete and utter mess. And the track record, quite frankly, I think stands at well over 50% of these are failures. In fact, if I'm correct, a recent report by McKinsey put the success rate at the sort of high 20s, if you're lucky. So, there's a huge amount of money being wasted and people's careers being destroyed simply because we're not approaching these situations in a proper way. So both of those stories that we heard really resonated with me.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Beatrix. I'm keen for either Gerard or Luisa to come off and speak on the back of what both of you or either of you have said. Who would like to speak first? Gerard, I can see you nodding away, so I'm wondering if you're keen to say something.
Not necessarily to add, but I think part of what I was trying to convey is, as Luisa said, change is, even if you have 1 million people in the country, when something changes, it's still personal to each and every one individual. So, and I think that's part of the challenge in a business environment. Is a business environment at a higher level tends to think in depersonalized attributes, but effectively, my experience has been once you attempt to personalize, and again, you have coaching methods, and you can actually be more successful, not just from a business perspective, but also at the level of individual well-being, right, and individual success. So I think that's where the challenge is to find the decision makers, the leaders in organizations who will allow some of this type of intervention, or who will act upon this, right? So, because when we talk about change management and coaching, everybody is coaching the poor worker, right, into working better, stronger, faster. Our challenge is to coach the big influencers and decision makers, right, and try and get to, because they're people too, and they go through exactly the same process. They're not better, they're not bigger, they're just human. And then that's where I try to work, and I think where coaches can, through proper positioning, have a major influence. It's not just about coaching the executive that has a performance issue, coaching the decision makers in this world. And then, as always, you start with the ones that are open to it, right? And take it from there. Look for the early adopters, the innovators, And I think there's great opportunity there. And I think there's great effectiveness that, you know, coaching methods and what all can have there.
Good, thanks. Luisa, can you build or comment?
Maybe just an observation. I think a lot has already been said, but I want also to underline what, to me, both Beatrix and Nick have commented, and there's a difference between short-term intervention where you may see result versus what I think Nick defined as a sustainable, and see what will happen in the long run. But Beatrix said about, re-looking at what people have in common eventually and then building on that. So for me, what's really important is that we do and we should have, when we look at a conflict, it's not about the immediate result, but it's really this kind of moving away. I mean, a conflict gives you a sense of urgency. You need to take action. But who's going to solve the conflict? Who is able to step a little bit back. And again, as a coach, that's what people stand with their clients and give perspective and really, either the way it is done or because what you look at or understanding what is at stake for the people in conflict. And then being able with a little bit more time, I would say. We all know a coaching journey is not a 1 hour intervention. IND is not 1 month intervention. Nick was mentioning about, his experience in resolving conflicts, not a 1 year probably thing. Beatrix, education, again, long. So I think that for me, what stands out is long-term, medium, long-term in order to be sustainable.
Thanks, Luisa. I want to bring some attention to a commonality that I know of between Nick and Beatrix. And Gerard, you were talking about there's an importance for us to focus on the decision makers at the top. But I'm aware that Nick and Beatrix, in many ways, you're focusing on the younger generation some of the time. And so at least I'm aware from just paying attention to the newspapers and politics that there feels like there's a groundswell of a younger population who are seeing things differently and wanting change. So can one of you speak to that? I'll come to both of you, but does one of you want to go first? Maybe I'll come to Beatrix first, as you're in education.
Yeah, I think this is a very good question, and thank you for putting it in a central focus, because we are really looking at the upcoming generation, many of whom are coming with already that knowledge that we might have forgotten, and they might be the reminders. At the same time, they are surrounded by all those challenges and all those distractions that are trying to get their attention the longest. And it's a competition on many fields to get that attention. Whereas at the same time, not as much attention is forwarded back to them, which is very much resonated with that crystal ball that Luisa showed us earlier. That in that crystal ball, I could see the fragile me, but I could see my surrounding, my heritage, my values, a reflection of it. And bringing it into education and doing it on purpose with a mission, as a parent, as a teacher, as an admin, as a school system administrator, a minister, an organization, a global entity. It makes difference. It makes a huge difference. And there is a balance that we can create by bringing it not to the background, but saying that these soft skills are the foundation. They are fueling, they are the base of that academic knowledge built on it. And this is something that is still misaligned. There is so much attention to the numbers, to the academia, to exams, to degrees, to qualifications. And we tend to forget what Gerard just said. We are all human beings living our human life. I'm not different than you. I am you. What you are having in you, I am having in me. And this is something that gets so often overlooked, and something that can easily bring it back to balance, a school, a community, a system, it can bring it back to balance once we start looking inwards and we don't look for the external validation, but we start looking for that inner balance.
Thanks, Beatrix. What I think I'm picking up from you is the need to be teaching these conflict resolution ways of thinking and being, even from a young age.
Yes, and I would highlight, apologies, I would highlight the being part in it. That me being me is my teaching. This is me and this is my teaching. There is no extra effort put in. There is no curriculum that needs to be added. There are no more extra working hours. You see me handling a conflict, that's my teaching. So very well said. Thank you, Matt.
Nick, can I bring you in?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with that more. I think the sooner we are able to give these skills to our younger people, the better. I mean, most of the folks that I work with are the younger people, and particularly in our firm, people in their early 20s, mostly, and the level of frustration and anger, I think, if I can put it that way, that they feel towards the older generation and the way that the older generation is conducting itself and what they're leaving in terms of a planet and a social, political, economic system for them to deal with, the fallout and the mess is driving them crazy. They feel a huge sense of injustice. They feel terribly frustrated because they are the ones who are going to carry the consequences, yet they have, or they feel that they don't have the power. They look upwards, they look at, and forgive me for characterizing it, but they look at Davos man and Davos lady, who have set themselves up as the leaders of the world. And it's quite frankly, it's quite disturbing to watch some of the videos where they actually say exactly this, that they know what is best for everybody, and they can't understand why people are starting to distrust them. But let's set that point aside for the moment. But I think if we were able to equip our young people with the tools that they feel that they could engage with the older generation, the people that have power, the people that have the ability to make the differences, I think the more empowered they'd feel, and the sooner we would be able to redress some of these injustices in a way that won't lead to a big bubble bursting, if I can put it that way. Because that's ultimately what will happen. If people feel that they have no other way to deal with this, ultimately it will turn to more kinetic ways of resolving problems.
Thanks, Nick. Now, my mind generally tends to go towards the future. So before we go to the Q&A and ask for input, from my side, I'm curious, maybe 2 or 3 minutes from each of you. For those of us in this room, we're coaches. We're here because we see that there's a need to serve a world in conflict, maybe increasingly in conflict. Where do you see, maybe in the now, maybe in the near future, where do you see the big opportunities are for coaches to have impact and to help the world in conflict? Maybe I can go to Luisa first.
Well, reflecting is $1 million question. But if I think about the biggest opportunity for coaches, I think we all are testimonies that the coaching approach is, and I don't want to say winning approach. You heard my relationship with winning and losing, but let me use the word winning in every context, because for me, the key is a curiosity piece that we do apply when as coaches. And if we approach with curiosity, we suspend judgment, and suspending judgment means you're not taking a decision. And that's the moment where a decision is made, if you follow my reasoning. So, because you don't start with the end in mind, you start with all possible options. And then with that curiosity, in that moment where all options are open, there is an opportunity to choose whatever is the best option for that moment. So going back to your question about where is the opportunity is really looking with those curiosity, because that curiosity opens a space for thinking eventually and choosing. So I would say curiosity / suspect judgment / giving yourself time to choose without that elephant getting into the room and, you know, go whatever direction. I hope I answer your question.
Yes, and not in the direction I expected. Thanks, Luisa. Gerard, what does the question do for you?
Well, I was trained as an engineer, huh? So I'll put it in this perspective. Is the and by the way, I've done a lot of sales and marketing activity as well. If I think about opportunity, I always, well, a coaching situation. Luisa, you talk about curiosity. It starts who is open to this. There is an invitation at some level. As somebody says, you know, I'm open to be helped, assisted, you know, guided, in whatever. So I think, and that's going to be the challenge, is so you have to start as coaches for those who are most open. In the comments, Luisa mentioned role models, right? That's exactly, you know, that's how you build from idea into implementation, is you find the individuals most susceptible and most likely to, it's a bit of a dirty word, but to market the coaching approach, right? Because of the positive impact it can have. And I think we have the examples of you know, also at the level of our political leaders and world leaders and business leaders, we see examples of individuals who are, who can be who are curious, right? And then we have those who are dogmatic, right? All the way up to megalomaniacs. So I'm always thinking about, you know, start where you have the best chance of hitting it and finding somebody who will connect, who will join the effort and build from there. And that is very difficult, right? To have access to the people who are both open and influential. Right? That's where I would look. Right? Make sense?
Yeah, Gerard, thank you. Open and influential. Beatrix, how about you for you? If I ask you that question about where's the biggest opportunity for us as coaches?
I would say we're not. Like we are surrounded by those opportunities. Do we notice them? Do we take an action when we notice them? And are we being the change that we want to see in the world? That's also a key question. And if we do take education as the birth of that new type of thinking, it's time for educational systems worldwide to unlearn what they think they know, because they are still in the mindset that I know what's best. And no, when we have a new situation, which we have now on many fronts, and the pandemic is one of them, is that kind of isolation, the pandemic of isolation, of loneliness, where I'm not having that curiosity, I'm not having that openness, and I'm fully living in my ego. And this is an invitation. And what you are creating and what many of us are creating in our lives is that invitation that join us for something better. Join us with curiosity, join us with an openness, and the opportunity is there. And it will find us, it will come to us. What we need is that openness and that willingness with an open mind and open heart.
Thank you, Beatrix.
You're welcome.
And Nick, how about for you?
I see most of the opportunity in education, but in educating both the leaders as well as educating the youngsters of our world, because I think if only one of the groups has that capacity, the spread of the benefit will be slow. I don't think we have collectively the time to wait for that to happen. So I see a huge synergy between coaching and systems thinking. I think that clearly, I mean, both of them actually, they intermarry and they borrow from one another anyway. But the easiest way for us to get coaching accepted in a sort of executive boot camp type environment is maybe to dress it up as systems thinking, which the executive world would be happy to pay dollars for. But of course, what we're doing is we're teaching them coaching. And then I think also to empower the young activist organizations with coaching skills as well, so that they have many more tools in their armory when it comes to persuading the people who have power to bring about change. So I see almost bookending, if I can call it that, the folks who are actually starting to make the changes. We have to teach more people. That's the bottom line. The more people we can empower, the more people who understand that there are different and better ways of resolving the conflicts that are holding us back from making the changes we need, the better it will be for all of us.
Nick, thank you so much. Perhaps before we go to everyone else and ask the questions that you have, maybe I can answer my own question. I know for myself, I think the opportunity is for us to begin to dream and imagine that better world, to imagine within ourselves, what does our world look like in a place where we are resolving conflicts better, and then considering, how do I contribute into that future? How do I maybe take my small part and make my life be part of that happen? That's my little soapbox I'm standing on. But let's come to everyone else. I was keen for people to write questions. Haven't seen too many. So instead, I'm going to ask who wants to come off mute and actually speak to the panel or speak to a member of the panel and ask their question directly. So if you'd like to do that, please put your hand up. The way you do that is you click on the reactions button on the bottom of the Zoom toolbar, and then you click the button that says raise hand. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm sure we've got time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. So be brave, click the button that says that you put your hand up and speak your question to us. Well, here's the moment where we have to wait and hope that someone asks the question. Who's got a question for us? Yes, Christiana, come on. Ask the question that you have for us.
This is a question in the field of education. So I know that myself and Beatrix have done some work around it. And how can we really see a breakthrough in the way we bring in coaching in schools and in education? Schools are thinking that having a counselor there supporting the students when they have a conflict maybe in school or with their studies or where their performance is not so well is sufficient for the well-being of the students. Okay, but we know, because we are coaches, that that's not sufficient, that a coach should be introduced in every school as the role. So I'm asking, not necessarily Beatrix because she's struggling to do that, but I'm asking Nick and Luisa and Gerard, what do you think needs to happen so that we can introduce coaching in education? What is the breakthrough that you think could really make a change?
Well, let me start quickly from our perspective in the corporate world. What we've done in our organization is, you rightly point out, just having one person or 2 people in HR who are qualified as coaches is not sufficient. So we have, and I don't know whether this is serendipity or it has been deliberate, but there are a number of employees who, like myself, have been through coaching training, and we are now acting as informal coaches for the other members of our staff. So members of our staff could come to us as individuals, and we try and do this across geographies so that people are, there's no sort of authority overlay in terms of who's working with whom. But it's starting to gather momentum, and it's proving to be quite an effective way, not only to support the people who've asked for help, but also for people to see the benefit of coaching as a whole.
Thank you, Nick.
Anyone else want to speak into the question?
Well, I tend to agree with Nick in terms of the more people can experience the benefit of coaching, the more opportunity we will have to have coaching. Now, what does it need to happen in organization like the one I work in order for not be a sporadic intervention related to a specific need, but more an holistic approach? I think it's probably also introducing coaching, not as a solution to a problem, but an opportunity to unlock possibilities. Because I remember again, and I almost, my coaching certification went back 10 years ago, but I remember the feeling of saying, I have a coach, or I want to become a coach, as a guilt feeling. And that also what in organization is positioned, oh, you need a coach because you have an issue to solve, you have a conflict to resolve, versus I think the shift will happen when we will finally position coach as it is, which is an opportunity to develop, going back to Beatrix, as human being, as a beautiful human being, we are all on in our uniqueness, as I like to call it. But until we don't make that shift from fixing something to unlocking potential, and then organization would really love to unlock potential because they need tremendously innovation, they need, good leaders, motivated employees, etc. So that for me, what needs to happen.
Thanks, Luisa. If I can speak, I'm not in the education sector directly myself, but having engaged with it on some level, my sense is there's a need for teachers themselves to have coaching skills. I've looked into things like, maybe Beatrix, you can tell more about this, but things like the Harkness process. There's ways that teachers can help students learn by exploration, learn by self-examination, learn through asking great questions, listening to each other, thinking more deeply. So shifting the teaching model from being teacher-led to being much more about discovery and about student-led. How can we teach students to actually discover things for themselves, get more curious much earlier in life, or maybe another way to put it, to maintain their curiosity all the way through life, even from a young child forwards? That's on my heart, at least. I'm looking at our time. We may have, if there's someone who's got a burning question, I just want to read out what maybe Jacob said. Jacob said, personally, I think coaching should be presented and introduced in all aspects of conflicts, personal, educational, economical, etc. That could be the first step. Once we're there, coaching will take it from there. Thanks, Jacob. Maybe one final comment from each of the panel before we go. Just before we do that, I just want to recognise our sponsors. This was arranged by North Point, sponsored by North Point, but also by Knowledge Works and by Beatrix, your organisation as well. Do you want to say the name of your organisation?
We have two names. We run under two
names.
The RAISE
just say them.
Is an acronym which would stand for Raise Awareness of Coaching in Education, and the other name, which is Coaching for Education. And this is how you find us, Coaching for Education.
Thank you, Beatrix. Thank you for supporting us. And just to let you know that this was as part of International Coaching Week, which is a platform promoting coaches and coaching for the International Coaching Federation. So 30 seconds each of the panel. What's the most important thing that you need to say to leave us with? And maybe Beatrix, you can go first.
I would say that the most important thing, what comes to me is remembering that we are on a journey, and what we are fighting for is very noble, and it's time to rephrase what we mean by fighting and take the determination, take the power, take the energy from the word, and leave the abuse, leave the aggression, leave violence out of the word and what we mean by this word. And then we are going to a nice place.
Beatrix, thank you. Nick?
I think the two things I'd like to leave us with is don't let the elephant take control. And the other one is don't underestimate the positive impact that you can have for other people. Those are just the two things I'd like to leave us with.
Thank you, Nick. Gerard?
For me, the most important thing is find a place where you can have an individual influence, and start somewhere. Right? It's as simple as that. That's what I've learned in. I'm not a certified coach, but you can impact other people, right? You can help them. You can help them move forward. You can support them, and in return, which is the nice thing, they will support you. I mean, that's been my experience, right? So the more you give, the more you get. So keep on giving and get. That's sort of my thinking around this.
Gerard, thank you. And last but not least, Luisa.
Well, a couple of thoughts from my side as well. The first one being, look at conflict not as a end state, but as a start state. So conflict is a symptom, and there is something at stake, which is very important for one of the party underneath. So, take the time. I think Beatrix said that it's going to be a journey. It takes patience, but enter it with curiosity. I cannot say it long enough. And don't forget, we are all role models to someone else. It's not a matter of choosing if we want to, we are. It's a matter of choosing what type of role models we want to be.
It's Luisa, and a great final word. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this. Trixie, if we can bring up the feedback slide, we'd love to get your feedback. So either go to this link, or alternatively, probably easily, pull out your phone, scan the QR code, and give us your feedback. We'd love to have some input from you on how you thought the day was, what was good, and where we could improve. From my side, in closing, I found a quote which resonates with me. It still resonates with me. I can't find out who it's from, but the quote is, if you want to stop a war, start a conflict. And on that note, thank you, everyone, and goodbye. Thanks to the panel, thanks to the speakers. Much appreciated. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.